The world is saved. The living room's dark save for light being cast from the big TV screen and the imminent sunrise that's teasing the one starry sky with whispers of morning.
Hey, George.
Hey, Lions, how's it going?
Oh, I'm just hopping along, just hopping along through life.
Really? Yep, yeah. I'm hopping from one thing to another, and then I hopped onto this game, and then hopped off.
Promptly hopped back off of this game.
I mean, not I know we're bad about burying the lead, but we're gonna get probably about 30 seconds to 2 minutes into this before people realize that I did not care for this game. I will still give it I will still do a completely honest and objective review of this terrible fucking game.
It's good. We're off to a good start then.
Yeah, exactly.
So we played Jumping Flash.
What?
Which is, oh, by the way, that's Jumping Flash ! That is an official part of the title. Yeah. So, there's a couple important things you will appreciate, because I try to keep my research limited to just what's experienced through the game. Every once in a while, I'll pop open a what do you call it, a little instruction manual, or look at the box art or something, right? I recently blew Erin's mind when I told her that Kirby was originally gray. She just was not.
Really?
Yes.
Huh.
Yeah.
You're
welcome. You just got splash damage mind blown.
Oh, no. I knew that. I'm flabbergasted that she didn't.
Oh, no, she did not. She's a
youngin',
what
what floors me is not that knowledge, but her ignorance.
Well played. So sorry, Erin. So this game came out in 1995. It was not a launch title for the PS1, but it was really close. And I was so sure that it was a launch title because it has all of these weird early PlayStation weirdnesses that we're going to get into.
Yeah, it definitely feels like an early PlayStation game. There's nothing about this game that doesn't feel like an early PlayStation game.
Yeah, so here's the thing. And this is in the Wikipedia article, so that falls under the umbrella of acceptable research, because I usually don't even read the Wikipedia article, but I was looking for something in this one. And this game was originally a tech demo that they just decided to turn into a full game.
Interesting. And that also sounds and feels right,
Yeah, it really does. Because there are so many things that in a more formal design process, they might not have been yeah, it's fine, let's ship this. Right?
I mean, I think, this game definitely has a little bit of that feel of somebody did something, just kind of for themselves, and then somebody else said, you can make money off of this, right? And they're like, well, if I make a few bucks, then that's cool, couldn't hurt anything. And then it becomes this huge thing. You're like, oh, yes, these were all design choices.
Yes, this was always the plan. So I will share with you my nostalgia goggles, because I've actually been wanting to play this for a while, right? So I've been occasionally, we're like, oh, what game should we play next? And I've been like, we could play Jumping Flash. It's weird. It's an awesome, weird early PlayStation game. Did I mention it's weird? Let's play Jumping Flash. And I finally wore you down, so thanks for that.
Yeah.
And I was looking...
Name of your sex tape.
I was looking, through my PlayStation games, and I was like, I want to play Jumping Flash because it's such a distilled essence of what early PlayStation games were like, as you've already said.
It is to early PlayStation games as Earthworm Jim is to 90s culture.
Yes, it is. It's so PlayStation Japanese. Oh crap, we have a video game console and no original IP. We need to put something on our video game console. Right?
Let's put a rocket-powered rabbit robot.
Yes. So I played this game a ton at Brian's house. I think he owned this, but we passed this game back and forth so much, I'm honestly not positive if it was my game or his game, but because it's short, right? You can murder this game in an hour, no question. And I looked up some speedrun times and they're barely over 10 minutes. So like,
nice.
It's just, I mean, if you know where to go, it's not hard. It's a super short game and it's just like, it's weird and kind of stupid. But I was looking at the box art and I had this exchange with Susan that I thought I would share with you. Is I realized she was, because I was looking at it and I realized she was like looking at it over my shoulder and I was like, come on, who wouldn't love that face? Look at him. And she said, is that yellow thing in the middle of his cone supposed to be his nose? And I was like, yes, it's a little gold R because his name is Robert. And she just like radio silence. And I was like, because he's a robot rabbit. And then she just kind of walked away.
Yeah. I think that Sue had an appropriate response, because if this was a video show, the audience would have seen me get up and like leave.
But that was a microcosm for me of what talking to you about this game was going to be like, because I was like, she has no nostalgia experience for this game, and I have only nostalgia for this game.
Well, and now may be a good time to kind of say, so that's your nostalgia experience. Here's my nostalgia experience for this, which is, so in Dungeons and Dragons, right?
I'm looking forward to how you're gonna tie this together.
There's okay, in 3.5, the one true edition, right? There's a plane called the Grey Waste of Hades, right? And so basically one of the planar traits that it has is that you have to kind of make will saves as you're on the plane, because it's not that it's actively hurting you. It is to a degree, but the problem is it is just sapping your will to do anything,
All right.
So like,
I think I might see where this mystery novel's going.
Yeah, I knew right when I said that you'd be kind of like, no, there's tie-in. So so basically the more time you spend on the plane, the harder it is to just kind of like find the will to even leave or do anything. And that's kind of my experience with the game, because I picked it up. I was like, okay, I'm going to play this. And then I got really angry at first with like a number of different things, so at which point I texted you and it said like, look, man, I've been trying to give this game a fair shake, and like listed off some of the things that we will talk about. And then like, I just kept playing it and I was like, oh no, I got the hang of it. And, I started like to keep going. I was like, I just cannot find a part of me that wants to play this game. Like what's the point of any of it? And I literally was sitting there like, what's the point of this game? What's the point of life? What's the point of like, just why, what are we all but momentary drops in entropy, like, but I realized, and we can probably get into this a little bit later, but that there were a number of different things that were happening in the game to where like, cause it's very similar to, Mario. It's a platformer,
Yeah. I mean, I would say the similarities stop at it's a platformer.
Right. But I was trying to kind of compare it to Mario, because it's got similar, like overarching, it's like jump from place to place, use jumping to achieve your goal. Right.
Yes. I mean, it is literally a platformer, but that is, yeah, go on.
But I agree with you in the sense that is where the similarities end, because I was trying to like look at it through a harsh lens on myself, saying, well, I enjoyed Mario 64, and this is also a 3-dimensional platformer. Why am I hating this so much? And I came up with a list, which we can go over, because I segregated it into visuals, audio, and gameplay.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a segue if I ever heard one. So what did you hate about the visuals?
So let's just start with the two things you should never say in the same breath, which is first-person platformer.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to intentionally try to argue with you about any of your points.
No, play the devil's advocate. That's fine.
I'm saying if I genuinely disagree with you, I will. But you have come out of the gate with a point that cannot possibly be argued with, because I know of only 2 first-person platformers, and I mean that literally. I know of only. I'm sure there are lots of them. But I know of only 2 first-person platformers. One of them is Jumping Flash, And the other one is Mirror's Edge, which was hailed for its innovation, right?
Yes.
And there's like 2 decades between those two games.
Right. Where they were like, basically with that one, they said, finally a game that gets this right.
Yeah.
You
so,
know?
yeah, I mean, platforming is a precision instrument. It's not something where you can just be wildly looking around and just hope you land in the right place.
Correct. And especially, well, if only one could wildly look around in this game, but we'll get to that in a second.
Well, so this is actually my mild counterpoint. And this is arguably a mechanical decision, but I think it's really relevant to the visuals as a first-person platformer, which is when you jump over a certain amount, which is pretty low, the camera forces you to look down where you're going to land. You cannot look away. So
correct.
They did at least consider, man, this would really suck if you weren't looking at the ground.
Yeah, and that is the one way that they did attempt to kludge it. And I did have a note that like that's a plus, you know, is that when you, especially if you do your second jump, which they don't really tell you about, but we'll get to that later. But when you jump, like you said, when you jump high enough, it does point you to the ground and say like, okay, where are you looking? Where are you going to land? And they do have a shadow, which will show you like this is where you're going, and that's super nice. All that's a plus that makes I would say that makes the game playable in any capacity.
Agreed.
You know, because if that wasn't there, I'd be like, this game is simply unplayable. You know, but like a number of things that is, again, like you said, like platforming is a precision. The whole point is precision, you know? And so I remember in the very first level, there's a little tower that has a platform that kind of comes out of it. So I walked up to it, and none of this was game breaking. It was just frustrating and immersion breaking. So I walked up to it. I'm like, I want to jump onto like the little overhang, go through the tower, and then jump off the back end of the tower. That's all I wanted to do. It should be simple to execute, right? What happened was I walked underneath it, jumped once, hit my head on the platform, backed out a little bit, jumped again, was still underneath the platform. So backed out a little bit more, jumped again, jumped completely over the platform, turned around, jumped, got onto the platform, started to walk through, clipping on something. Then I looked down and there's a little lip on the walkway, which you don't just walk onto. It hard stops you. So then I jumped onto that and then had to wait until I glided back down to kind of like thread the needle in the little archway, and then stepped one step too far and fell off the back. And that's when you got your first rage text. Because I was like, but why? Like, why any of this? And again, you know, it is just a limitation of, and now to juxtapose it with like Super Mario 64, where it is generally third person, you can't put it into a first person view. But I just did not realize, I'm like, oh yeah, that's 100% necessary. And actually in Borderlands 2, in one of the DLCs, they actually have a platforming portion, and like literally you jump onto the platforms, and if you die twice, it straight up tells you, I think the mission straight up tells you like, yeah, first person platforming is stupid, and then like it just creates the pathway, like you can just straight up not do it at all and you get the same reward, because they're like, yeah, no, nobody likes first person platforming. So so unfortunately that was not so widely known a lesson in the birth of the 3D era.
Well, and you mentioned, and there's no way to talk about how this game looks without kind of dabbling in the mechanics, because all of the visual setup is centered around that first person platforming mechanic. But you mentioned like, oh, I was trying to, you know, like casually walk through this little space. And something they don't really tell you about this game, because they don't communicate any useful information to you about the game, is you should almost never be walking anywhere if there is sky over you. Like, because some of the levels you are in like little tunnels or you're underwater or whatever, but if there's enough room to jump, you should almost always be jumping, like ABJ, always be jumping, because that's how all of the levels are designed. They're designed to be seen looking straight down from the pinnacle of your double jump. And so you can maneuver fairly well that way, even though well, I'll get to the draw distance in a second, but if you are like, oh, I'm going to walk over here and then do a small jump, like a little hop onto this thing and then walk over there, that's like, it just feels like they had to build ground so that a younger or less games literate player wouldn't be falling to their death constantly, but they kind of want you to play the floor as lava. They really, all of the objectives are places you have to jump to, and the ground or the long stretches of flat part that you can technically walk on, like there's no reason to do that. And sometimes they actively dissuade you from it. So when you get into a situation where you're like, oh, walking through here is a chore, it's like, yes. And they probably should have done something to communicate to you that you should never solve your problems by walking, right? It's like every time I see a bird like hop more than a couple steps, when they hop like that 10th or 12th step, I'm just like, fly, you idiot, you can fly, you're a bird.
Fly, you fools. Yeah, and so that actually does lead nicely into another complaint. Yeah, that I had. Point. I don't know. Anyways, whatever. But is that and so your thing solves this, which is, and I did not know that, which is you should always be jumping, because then you can actually survey the scene pretty well. Because of the tank controls, right, and the fact that up is move forward, up isn't. There's no way to actually look around you.
So there is, but not while moving. If you are stationary and you hold, I think, R2, you can use the D-pad to look around without physically moving through space. So this is, again, not a video podcast, but when you were saying like, oh, in Super Mario 64, you can technically go into first person. But guess what? When you're in first person, you can't move. Like, and this game has a similar solution, except there's no way to get out of first person.
And they don't tell you that.
No, they
which
don't.
I mean, we can definitely get into later. Yeah, they don't tell you anything, And I've got I think we can get into that in the mechanics on like how the mechanics are conveyed.
Yeah, they're not.
No, but there's no tutorial, not even like a level tutorial, like Super Mario is very, very good at. It's very much
thrown directly into the fray.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was one of the issues that I was having, which was, to the best of my knowledge, there was no way to survey or look around. So I'm sitting here trying to think. I mean, I'm in the middle of this hostile world that's just filled with frogs that are trying to kill me.
Yes.
And missiles.
Missiles that come out of pigs.
Like they do. I feel like pig could be like an acronym there, like ICBM,
Oh, yeah, it's not though. It's actual pigs.
Yeah, no, it's not. And ICBM is actually both the name of the missile and what happens when you see one.
There's no way you made that up.
Maybe, I'm sure I probably got it from somewhere and it's just rattling around back here. But anyways, that is too creative for me. But no, it's like I'd be sitting there. I was like looking around. So jet pods is what you're there to get.
Yeah.
Right. So I was
they
like,
look like carrots because you're a Robbit.
Oh yeah, you might want to tell the audience that the Robbit. Right. Because you're a robot rabbit.
Robot rabbit.
So you're a Robbit
named Robbit.
Right. And so if any of our listeners are still here from not having killed themselves for how stupid that is, they can continue listening to the podcast. But no, so yeah. So first of all, the fact that you're supposed to be collecting jet pods is like poorly conveyed. I just kind of got there because it's the only thing on the map. So I was like, maybe I'm supposed to be collecting this. I don't know.
There is, to be fair, there is a little opening cinematic that I know you hard X'd over because you skip everything.
Yep. Anyways, but yeah, so I got like the first jet pod, right? And so then I'm like, okay, well, where's the next jet pod? So I'm kind of like looking around, and I needed to like look up and down and I just couldn't do that. And so I'm trying my best to like kind of visually conceptualize the space that I'm in. And because I didn't know that there was a way to actually do that, because of the tank controls, I was always moving around. I was getting frustrated because I was like, where do I go? What do I do?
Okay. So here's my half pushback, half absolutely agreeing with you. which is if you always be jumping, then you would see the little, what would you call it? Like indicator, I guess, you know, and it says like jet pod, and it's the only indicator that's yellow because the exit indicator is blue. So it's, they do a good job of making it unique, right?
Yes.
So the very first time you see that little indicator, you're like, oh, what's that? And then you go and get it, and it says, you know, like 3 jet pods remaining or 2 jet pods remaining or whatever. So it's, they do more or less communicate to you like, hey, you know, we'd like it if you pick these things up. Here's the problem. The draw distance on the original PlayStation, especially this early in the PlayStation's history, was like, I don't know, couple feet. Like, it's not far. So
about the distance of the fog on Silent Hill, if I had to guess.
Yeah, not good at all, right? And so when you need to go find something that is far away, they don't render the indicator until you're close-ish. And if I had to guess, I would say they could have rendered the indicator further out than they did, because it's not graphically intensive to just have a friggin' yellow circle that's like go in this direction, but they want you to explore because it's a platformer. So they want you, and the levels are all sandboxes essentially. They're like, you immediately have access to the entirety of the level because it is one giant 3-dimensional space, right? Whereas like in Crash Bandicoot or Super Mario 64, you have to perform tasks and go on a somewhat linear path to get from point A to point B. Less so in Super Mario 64, very much so in Crash Bandicoot. But in this, like, you just instantly have access to the entire map, especially with your ludicrous jump, right? So it's not clear like where you should be going, so they kind of just want you to randomly move about. And if you don't know that you should always be jumping, you might walk directly underneath one of the indicators and never see it because it just never came into your field of view. If you're jumping around like an asshole, then it absolutely will eventually come into your field of view because you'll be up over it. And as you're coming down, you will see it show up on your HUD. So I really feel like the visuals are severely hampered by the draw distance, and sometimes you're just falling and you don't know if there's going to be anything solid for you to land on. And then if you combine that with the fact that you're not jumping around like a moron constantly, and you don't realize that you can like kind of stop what you're doing, like arrest your forward momentum and look around, it doesn't feel like a joyous exploration experience. It feels like you're like, well, I don't know where to go, so I'm just going to wander aimlessly. And wandering aimlessly is not the same as exploring.
And wandering aimlessly is not the same as exploring, and not as much fun when there is a time limit. But that, you know, we can get into in mechanics. But so one of the other things that, and this is something that I don't think was mastered at this time in history. So I'm not chiding the game for doing this. I am saying that it doesn't hold up and the game sucks for doing this, which is which is the fact that when you take damage, there is nothing that tells you where that damage is coming from. Which again, in a first person,
no like little flash indicator or an arrow or anything. Yeah, no, there's
flash
none of that.
Arrow, or like a side of the screen is red, you know, like, which is what you see a lot of times is like when you're taking damage, like for whatever reason, your right eye is bloodshot, you know, so you know, like, oh, it's coming from this direction, which nothing brought that home to me more than when I got onto that first hill after getting that first jet pod. And I was like, just trying to survey the scenery, and this pig was shooting missiles at me, which, to be fair, I feel confident in saying that I wasn't expecting the pig to be shooting missiles.
Yeah.
You know, and from the angle that he's at, right? Like, especially if you are jumping, right? If you like are jumping once or twice, the missiles can be angled kind of at a down trajectory, right? So unless you're looking right at it, you're hearing the sound effect of like this kind of like missile kind of, and then all of a sudden, like, you just like, I just took damage, and I was like, whoa, what's happening? And I took more damage. I was like, I don't know what's going on. I took more damage, and I just moved, you know, because I was like, wherever I am, I don't know what's happening, but I can't be here anymore. It took me a couple of passes to figure out, oh, that thing's shooting missiles at me, you know. But again,
and
the visual,
that's not a good feedback experience, because you were like, well, standing here kills me. moving seems to slow or arrest the killing me, but I don't know why. Was the floor poisoned? Was the pig shooting me? Was spikes falling on me? Like, especially with a first person camera, it's like I don't know why changing what I was doing stopped what was happening.
Right, exactly. Like, it's very, very similar to just all of a sudden somebody taking a giant sheet, throwing it over you, and then just like hitting you with a baseball bat. And you're like, I don't know why this is happening, but I feel like the only option I have is to move. And so I did, and I was like, well, that stopped it. Now let's investigate further. But it was very much, as opposed to in a video game, when you take damage, you should be able to immediately know what's giving you the damage and assess and then retaliate in whatever way possible. It was very much so a scientific endeavor of like, okay, well, I'm taking damage here. I'm not taking damage over here. Okay, let's form the hypothesis. Let's look at it. All right, let's set up controls. Let's walk halfway back to where I was taking damage. Now I'm still not taking damage. Okay, well, and so I spent more time than I'd like to admit trying to figure out that this. No, I take that back. I spent an appropriate amount of time trying to figure out that the pig was shooting missiles at me.
Yeah,
but yes, I felt that not knowing where damage was coming from could be problematic, especially because there's a lot of enemies that can just straight up sneak up from behind you. So then all of a sudden you just are taking damage, and you pretty much, when you take damage, unless you happen to be facing the thing that's dealing damage to you, you're likely to get hit twice, because you get hit once and then you have to do a 360 to figure out where the damage is coming from and come up with a countermeasure.
Yeah, and see, again, they really should convey to you somewhere in the game that you should ABJ, because if I take damage, the first thing I do, jump up in the air, because most of the enemies are either ground-based or they travel on a mostly horizontal plane. So there are flying enemies, but they don't fly in true free 3D the way you might attack someone if you could fly, right? They move in kind of a predictable AI enemy sort of way. So when you get hit, if you just immediately jump into the air twice, then it forces the camera down, and then you have now the ability to survey what would have been behind you and to the side of you and to the other side of you, right? And in your flank, like, you're immediately given an eagle-eye view of the situation, and you're probably out of harm's way for a few seconds while you're assessing it. But again, I don't remember coming to that conclusion as a child. I just know that when I was playing this game, I was just like, ABJ, right? Because every problem is essentially solved by jumping.
Yes. Yeah. And then the one final note that I have for Vision, I got a couple of other things, but the one thing I want to make sure that we touch on is that it's low poly, I mean, yeah.
So here I will full on disagree with you, not because I think these graphics have held up well, because they're ugly as hell, but I think that someone, when they were designing this, sat down and said, if we just make everything out of metal and we make everything have hard corners and we make it look like a silly cartoon, then in 30 years, when people look back at this and they realize everything is made out of 4 triangles, it'll be okay, right? Because it still doesn't look good, but it never looked good, because there are places where they could have made higher polygon models and they chose not to. Like the little pig missile launcher things just literally have triangles for feet. Not like, oh, that's the best we could do. Like, they chose to give them single triangles, one on each side for a left foot and a right foot. And it's just, to me, it makes it feel like they were trying really hard to lean cartoon and not so much, oh my God, it's 3D. Look at what we can do with polygons. And so that helps.
So interestingly, I agree with all that. So what I was going to say is that, it's low poly, fine, whatever. Everything from this era is, and I do feel that that in and of itself was not a problem. The thing that I thought clashed was the fact that everything has a texture to it. And I felt that they could have used more like, just not like flat colors, but like less texturing. So that way it would make it look more like a cartoon, but like the textured ground, the textured grass, the textured, especially in like the first, like couple levels, like the ground has texture, the the buildings have texture. It's all textured, so it doesn't look like a cartoon, and it makes it look kind of like gritty. That plus the low poly sometimes can make it difficult to kind of like visually suss everything out, because it all kind of blends together, especially because they did go for a very unique visual style with the polygons that they were using. It's not, you can't like look at it and say that's a pig, because it doesn't necessarily look exactly like a pig,
Yeah.
So then when you put that against a highly texturized background, sometimes it would be difficult to kind of pull it out. So I do agree that I really enjoyed the character models, and overall the visual aesthetic I thought was really good, as far as it being this zany kind of thing. But considering that they were going for this bizarre zany Robbit situation, and then didn't do a bunch of like really like kind of high vibrant colors, that's where I kind of felt that there was a little bit of a disconnect between the shading and the texturing and the overall aesthetic.
Yeah, and this feels like a game that probably would benefit from like an HD re-release. Like if they changed very little about the game itself and literally just had a designer spend a weekend making all the textures super high res and making the draw distance like infinity, because modern hardware could do it. Because I mean, there are plenty of things broken about the game, several of which we've already enumerated, and there's more to come. But I think you're not wrong that the grainy textures suck a little bit of the like, oh, it's silly and cartoony. Why does everything look grainy? Because everything has a texture. All the stone has texture, all the dirt has texture, all the grass has texture, all the buildings have texture. Just like everything has this kind of grainy pixel. Oh God, what do you call it? It's like it's a pixel texture mapped onto like a 3D solid, and so everything just kind of looks dirty. Which is, the colors are still relatively bright and solid, but like filthy.
Right.
Which, yeah, it does muddy up what you're looking at a little bit. I think, and I can't verify this in real time, but I feel like things have texture, but creatures typically don't.
That is what I would agree with that.
Yeah, so that creates a little bit of contrast, but because there's so much visual noise, it's probably not enough, or not as much as it maybe should be.
And I think that too, just for me, it made things a little bit more difficult to see. But for me, the big thing is just that it clashed with the aesthetic of like, this is zany insanity for the sake of zany insanity, So I mean, it's just kind of like if you took Borderlands and you gave it the Call of Duty aesthetic, right? It'd be like, why are people making so much light of this? This is serious, So because of that, I think that it telegraphed to me kind of the wrong idea of what the game was supposed to be a little bit,
Yeah, and that does feel like giving into the more powerful hardware, right? Is they were just like, we can map textures onto 3D solids, and no one said, yeah, but don't. Just make everything solid, flat colors, and it'll look like a cartoon.
They were so worried about whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
Yeah. The one other thing I will say about the visuals that really just irritated me is this is, I think, a close cousin to the hitbox, but because it's first person, I have no idea if the hitbox is good or not. Maybe it's awesome. I have no freaking clue if the hitbox is fair or not. What I can tell you is that because you should always be jumping, it's very tempting to land on enemies, because when you bounce off an enemy, you get 2 more jumps. So if you're like a super, elite player, you can actually just like parade through the stage and hardly ever touch ground because you're just bouncing off enemies and getting your double jump back. It is not immediately obvious to me which enemies you can jump on and which enemies you can't, because some of them hurt you when you jump on them, even though you still get your double jump back. Like, it doesn't behave differently, but you do take damage. And some of them you can actually murder by repeatedly jumping on them. So you've got your little pew pew cannon, but you can also jump on a lot of enemies to death. Pew 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 pew. It's actually, it's more like a whoop. It's whoop 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 whoop.
Well, which is it?
Well, that's what I said. It's more like a.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we really need to run this to ground.
But yeah, so and maybe there's some obvious cue that I'm just a moron and I missed, but I would be like, always be jumping through a level and I would land on an enemy that hurt me and I was just like, how was I supposed to know that? Like, should I have just memorized that? Like, are there spines? Is it because he's a certain color? Like, and I find that kind of thing frustrating when I'm like, well, this is a really useful way to move through space, like bouncing off enemies, but sometimes
it's not.
Sometimes it's not, and it's not obvious why, which is like a Skinner box situation where now I'm like, I'm afraid because what if the floor is electrified right now? I can't tell until I put my paw on it, so maybe I just won't put my paw on the floor at all, right? So that was, to me, this feels like a really close cousin of the hitbox. Is I'm supposed to be platforming through the world, and sometimes I get hurt, and I'm not totally sure why, and I'm annoyed.
Right. But all that being said, I think that the sound that your gun makes, either whether it's pew 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 or poop poop poop, I think is a good a segue as any into audio.
Poop, 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 poop.
So what were your thoughts on the audio?
So I like this music. It's really silly, kind of fun, cartoony. Like, there's an item you can get in the game that is the obvious, descendant of the superstar, which literally makes everything on the screen flash insanity rainbow colors. It makes it impossible to tell what is going on. Which part of me is just like, yeah, why not? Like, it was already hard to tell what you were doing. Let's just full on make it impossible.
Just drop acid and try again.
Yeah, go crazy, jumping flash. You do you. But when that's happening, when you're in that, the music is so like pump up, like I'm untouchable. Everything is just great. And it's not I'm untouchable, I'm going to destroy all my enemies. It's I have no enemies. I'm a Robert. Everyone loves me and I love everyone, right? It's just total, reefer madness version of an acid trip. And all of the level music is like that. It's just kind of fun and like funky. Even the boss music is really not all that like threatening or scary. The whole thing feels childish in a way I probably am mostly appreciating because of my nostalgia goggles, but definitely appreciate. It's just like, hey, this is silly, and like even when I die, the stakes really aren't that high, so whatever.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think that a lot of the sound kind of comes through in that regard, like kind of all of the zany stuff that when he's talking, he's just kind of like, hey, I'm whatever stuff he says. I can't remember what he says, but it's very. He when he speaks, the Robert when he speaks is very lighthearted and kind of jovial. Your number of booster packs that you have is on a spring at the top of your HUD, and when you jump, it makes kind of like a boing, like kind of like
it's like it's almost like a fuzzy dice sort of thing.
Yeah. And so it makes like a fun little noise. When you blow up enemies, they explode into coins, which, make a very satisfying coin noise. So, I mean, honestly, I don't have a whole lot of notes for audio, but there was nothing in there that audio wise that I found unacceptable. And also nothing that really stood out as, like this is a thing, this was a choice that they did that was like really, really good as far as audio for gameplay sake. But yeah, I did think that that in this sense, the audio did serve the aesthetic of zany robot rabbit game well,
which has a well-known sound,
Oh yeah, I mean, like if you're plugged,
it's an established genre.
Yeah, I mean, if you're plugged into the zeitgeist at all, you know exactly what this song sounds like.
Well, so and there's some sound effect things I wanted to make specific note of because I think your comment that there's like nowhere where it's obviously super helpful for the gameplay. I think this game could be played either on mute or with the sound way low, and it wouldn't really impact much. There's a couple enemies that make a noise when they're close to you, and if you heard that noise but they're not in your field of vision, you might always be jumping to get away from them. But generally speaking, I think you could probably play the game with no sound effects and be very successful, right? That being said, they made a couple decisions that I just found delightful. I think they were decisions intentionally made for that feeling, because the boop, 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 like shooting sound effect, that's not how I imagine a gun sounding, and it's not how I imagine lasers sounding. So why did they go with that noise? Why the hell not? It's a delightful noise for a gun to make. It almost sounds like a sci-fi version of like a children's pop gun. Like, like the ones you used to like put a cork in. That kind like if you could do that like repeatedly, it's almost that kind of like silly, like, oh yeah, it's a gun, but it's like a fun, silly gun. Like nobody's really dying. They're just exploding into coins. Like in Scott Pilgrim, everything's fine here. And so I appreciate that. I also appreciate that the jumping noise sounds like, I don't even know what. It's like I couldn't even begin to imitate it. It's like a sci-fi jetpack noise kind of thing. It doesn't have like a rising sound effect so much. Like when Mario jumps, that's not what jumping sounds like, but it's like an upward noise. It's, brrr. So it's like, it has this uplifting feeling and it's an uplifting visual. So they kind of go together. The jumping flash jumping noise is just a fun, weird sci-fi noise. Like it's just a pointless sci-fi noise for pointless sci-fi noise sake. And there's a lot of little choices like that. Like when you bounce off something, it makes like a very, very Wile E. Coyote Roadrunner-y like burn. Like there's just a lot of silly, ridiculous sound effects that, as you said, like really support the overall, this is a cartoon kind of, this is for children kind of feeling, with one amazing exception. Before I get to that, all the special weapons are also, we didn't mention this in visuals, but all the special weapons are like fireworks. So there's like a cherry bomb and there's Roman candles and there's little spiral things that like shoot off sparklers, and they all make like similar sounds to what you would expect. Like they actually sound semi-realistic, like, oh, it's fireworks, or oh, it's a little sparkler thing going off. And so like they're all like delightful because fireworks make like fun, silly noises when they're not the explodey part, but like the whoosh part, right? So all of that is like super in favor of the candy coated kid aesthetic. In I think level 3, the water level, because there's got to be a water level, and I'm positive you didn't get this far. Yes,
correct.
Yes. Yeah, because you would have rage quit way sooner than this. So there's a little elevator that you go in this little elevator, and it's a closed room, like it's like a proper elevator, and then the door opens and you're somewhere else and you go out of the elevator. I would pretty safely slap bet that the elevator door, the sound the elevator door makes is the sound that doors make in like Wolfenstein and Doom. Like nice. It's toned down a little. It's not quite as guttural and like soul shaking as the sound effect is in Doom. But if it's not a direct theft of that sound that they then made some changes to, like in post-production, it is obviously trying to be that sound. Because this is the only place in the game that has doors, and there's only like 3 doors. And unless you lose your direction, you would only hear the sound like a handful of times. And it really feels like they did it on purpose. And it's so, so out of place. And it's just so awkward that they want you to notice. They're like, yeah, we stole this sound. What are you going to do about it? We've got the Robbit.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that does seem like an interesting choice, but yeah, overall I felt that the sounds were very enjoyable. The visuals were very untenable. So like I was trying to think ineffable. That so I was thinking that, like a lot of times, I'm trying to think like, did the sound feed me any information? And I don't think that it did, but I also don't think they ever fed me any misinformation either, So
the closest thing I can think of it feeding you information is you always know when you hit something, right? Because there's a visual indicator, but there's also an auditory indicator. And you always know when you picked something up. right? So if you touch an item, if you touch one of the jet pods, if you pop something, like if an enemy pops, or there's bonus levels with balloons that pop, like all of those sound effects are unique, for one, to their, various features and functions, but they only show up when they're giving you that feedback. So like you never hear the pop noise for no reason. You never hear the I picked up an item noise for no reason. So if you were like trying to dodge enemy fire, missile fired from a pig's face or whatever, and you landed on an item and you didn't realize it, you would hear the I got an item noise, and he usually says something like, all right. So you don't need that information to survive, but it is at least minimally helpful.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. But yeah, do you have anything else for audio?
I will just say that more than the visuals are cute, and I appreciate what they were going for, but like we've said a million times, and we will say a million times more, low poly just doesn't age well. But because PlayStation games were on CDs, they have CD quality audio, which is pretty good, right? Like most human ears are not, sorry, audiophiles, you're not as finely tuned as you think you are, right? So early PlayStation games basically have high enough quality audio that it didn't age poorly. And so all of the cutesy sound effects, all of the fun, like funky, jazzy music and stuff, like I felt like that honestly held up exactly as well in reality as it did in my memory, which is, from this era, that's not a safe bet. So it was nice that like when I heard, like the crazy, I'm on having my acid trip, super music, I don't even know what that item's called, so we're going to call it acid. So when you're on the acid and everything's freaking out visually and you've got like the fun music, I was like, yeah, this is exactly how I remember this music. It's just like fun and empowering, and like I just don't have a care in the world. So I'd say the audio, if we're scoring things, held up way better than the visuals. But now we can finally go to the thing we've already been talking about for 40 minutes, which is the horrible first-person mechanics. Yes.
So actually, just to kind of ease us in, I'm gonna complain about something that isn't the first-person mechanic.
So we're unburying the lead or reburying it?
Oh no, I'm going to talk about something terrible. Oh. It's just not that particular terrible mechanic. I mean, look, man, we're not one note ponies. That's how that goes, right?
Yeah. Eat that horse.
But so this game does something that I don't want to say it's like a cardinal sin, but like you definitely, as a general rule, you don't do this, which is if you're not doing anything at the beginning of the game, you will take damage repeatedly.
Oh, yes. If you press start and then put the controller down to eat Cheetos or something, you might immediately die.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of a little frustrating to me, especially for a game that has clunky and awful first-person navigation. I brought it back. But no, it's like, so, I was sitting there and I was like, okay, so, game loads up. I'm like, all right, let me start to kind of press button. So I pushed up a little bit and I was like, okay, up, back, left, right. All right. That's how movement works. Okay. And jump and square and oh God, what's happening? And like, because by the time I had just like kind of gone through what all the buttons do, right. I was taking damage from the frog thing that was hopping towards me. And I think that leads in very well to, like, first of all, there is no tutorial, but we'll get to that in a second. But like, is the fact that not only is there no tutorial level, like where basically there's zero gating mechanics, like in the sense that like, you don't like get to a place where they're like, okay, now we're going to make sure that you know this one thing. It's like, here's the world. And if you don't at least know, if you don't know thing 1, 2, and 3, you will never get past this world. And then you may never learn 4, 5, and 6 ever.
Yeah. And if you are not clever enough to do basic experimentation, you may never learn 1, 2, and 3. Like part of our angry text conversation was me going, do you know that you can double jump? And you being like, right. Nope.
Yeah. No, and that's so to bring it all back, that is exacerbated by taking damage off the bat, because I'm relatively confident I would have had a much, much, much better opportunity to figure out that I could double jump if I didn't start immediately taking damage within the first 5 seconds of the game, because now all of a sudden I'm just swinging for the fences. I'm trying to get away.
Yeah.
And
Now you're
so
just
I'm
pushing buttons randomly because you're dying.
Yeah, exactly. So now I'm using whatever tools I was able to glean in that first 5 to 10 seconds. That's all I'm using, especially because of the visuals, I don't always know where damage is coming from or where all of the bad guys are. Like I'm sitting there, like I'm in this constant state of like, oh God, I might get hit. So I'm not going to experiment at all because I don't really ever have a safe space to do that experimentation, So like if the frogs, instead of slamming into you and dealing you damage, maybe they just like nudged you or something, or like they had like the first level, maybe the first level is completely sandboxed out and nothing deals you damage, or maybe you have to like hop your way, like after you get the first jetpack, it says like, like, oh, you stole a jetpack from this area, now you're playing with live ammo, and like the safeties turn off, like a million different ways that they could have made it so we would be like, experiment all that you want. And now, like we know we've gated it, so we know that you have like, you can double jump, you can do this, you can do that. Like if they had put me into a room, right, where there was a platform I could jump onto and then a way, way, way higher platform, and I had nothing else to interact with, I'd be like, well, I've got to have a way to get to that. But I spent probably about 15 minutes looking for a way to mechanically get higher until eventually you said like, you can double jump, right? And I was like, no, I didn't. Now that I do, that's hugely helpful. If I very well could have spent at least a half an hour without knowing this very key mechanic, which is very, very bad gating. And I think that it kind of starts with the fact that you take damage in the first 10 seconds.
Well, and I'm thinking about it, the level design is, I don't think there's really any kind of difficulty ramp. So the first level could just as easily be the 10th level or the 100th level, because they don't really get any harder. You do have to do slightly more complicated platforming later, but not in a way where there's like increased penalties. Like if you screw it up, you just fall down and then you just hop back up. And as long as you know that double jumping is a thing, which to get past the first level, like you need to know that. So as long as you know double jumping is a thing, and you know that getting the jet pods and getting to the exit is your objective, which again, like you would have to figure that out to get past the first level at all, you can't really be in a position later where you would ever time out on a level, because they don't do anything to say like, oh, well, here you have to double jump and then do this crazy wall jump, or here you have to double jump like in between these spikes, and if you touch them you die, or here you have to double jump like while these enemies are murder housing you. Like they don't really ever pull any of those tricks out of the bag. Like the later levels are themed differently, and they do have like a tiny bit more difficult platforming, but they never really are like, oh, okay, you've made it to level 5. The platforming in level 5 is going to be bonkers compared to the platforming in level 1. Like that was baby hour, this is man hour, right? Like they never do that. And one, I don't think that's an accident. I think they don't do that on purpose. And two, it creates this weird like time is a flat circle where, because the first level and the last level are essentially equally difficult, that means the first level doesn't teach you anything.
Right. And I mean, that's the thing, is that, you can look at games like World 1-1 in Mario, or Portal, or like all these other games where like, I don't need what's his name? Egoraptor says, like, I don't need a tutorial that says like, Mega Man, hey, Mega Man, you need to do whatever, like, I don't need like somebody screaming at me saying like press this button to do this. But I definitely think just basically plopping me down in a world that is, and also too, while we're on it, is it's kind of antithetical to the aesthetic of like, hey, it's this zany, cartoony, fun thing where it's like you've set me down in a world where like basically I'm like, okay, like while I am still crawling out of the egg, somebody punches me in the face. That's a hostile world.
Yes.
So you just plop me down in this hostile world where like I'm just like running around looking, and I've got a timer up in the upper left hand corner, which is ticking down. So I'm like, okay, so clearly, like there's a time component involved. So they add all these things that just completely push you away from experimentation, and they in no way gate you in such a way to say like, look, you have only really like one option. You have to jump higher than you've ever jumped before to get across here, you know? Like even if it, and I'm sure, I think like you're stranded on the planet or whatever, you know, but it's like, oh, hey, you know, you're stranded. So, you know, they don't give you a double jump at first, and you like collect an item and now you can double jump, or, you know, like in order to get out of the giant crater that you've plopped yourself into, you know, like that's the first world and you learn double jumping that way. I mean, there's a million different solutions to it, but they basically kind of, this is an example of what happens when your level design is not incredibly well thought out, especially from a tutorial standpoint.
Yeah, and we should say explicitly, because you said tank controls, and that's a thing that I think any of our younger listeners, people who have never thought critically about the older games they used to play, people who foolishly went the N64 route instead of the PlayStation route, or if they showed up to the PlayStation at like the face you're making at me, people who showed up to the PlayStation at like late in the PlayStation's life, or like at the PS2, right? Any of those situations, like if you either entered video games right after this time in history, or you just never really thought about it before, the original PlayStation shipped with a controller that did not have analog sticks, which means a lot of early PlayStation games expected you to do three-dimensional movement using the D-pad, which I have made my peace with, right? That is just burned into my muscle memory, and I don't like it, but it's a thing I know how to do, right? Like I know how to write in cursive. I hate it. I think it's a giant, terrible way to do anything, but it is a thing that like is built into my muscle memory, and I can force myself to do it. If you're coming back to three-dimensional movement with the D-pad, having not lived through that early in your game's literacy and early in your life, it's like being in hell, because nothing behaves the way you would expect. And later they did add analog sticks to the original PlayStation, so you might even find yourself in a position where you are playing this game on a controller that has analog sticks that are not doing anything, which feels even more like being in hell, because you're just like, I just want to walk forward. Why is this not making me walk forward?
Oh yeah, no, it is really weird to like have your brain mapped in such a way, because I ghost reached for the analog stick at least a dozen or so times. You know, like when I needed to like turn, my brain just said, "Quick, turn to your right and see what's dealing you damage." I was like, "Okay, let me just." No, I need to use the D-pad. You know, it's just it is incredibly jarring. So with tank controls, up and down make you move forward and backwards. And then left and right make you move left, make you turn left and right. They don't make you strafe. There is no strafing.
Right. You can't hold down one of the shoulder buttons to strafe. And you also can't travel in like an obvious arc. So you can't like go forward and to the left, right? I mean, you kind of can, but you sort of do it in this like arc. It's not like what you would think of if you had analog sticks, right?
Right.
And because you should, ABJ, you have to like stop traveling and orient yourself and then like start traveling again, which again, like I have this baked into my muscle memory, but forcing myself to think about it, I was just like, this is so janky. Like this is horrible. Like it's, and even though I can do it successfully, like this game is not hard. It's not designed to be hard. And also if you are comfortable with tank controls, it's just not a hard game, but like forcing myself to really think like, how would I feel if I didn't know what I know and I had to jump from this platform to that platform using the tools that have been made available to me? Oh, I would feel like this is friggin' Dark Souls. Like it's just so bad. Like it's so bad. And it honestly staggers me going back and playing early PS1 games and just thinking like, how the hell did they let this thing out the door without analog sticks? Like, did no one raise their hand and say, this feels unfinished? Like, we've added a third dimension and no way to interact with it?
I think they did, but then that person was immediately told to get out, and then they went to Nintendo, which actually had an analog stick when it came out, because they recognized as game designers that the hardware would need a way to interact with the software.
Yeah,
you know,
which I appreciate, and I would have appreciated even more if they said, you know what's better than one analog stick? 2 analog sticks.
That is true, but better, not perfect. It's still better than none.
That's true. Or worse, the games that once you had a PlayStation controller that had analog sticks, the early games had no way to reconcile those inputs, so the analog sticks
exactly
didn't function.
Yeah, they just look at it and they're like, "What?"
Yeah.
So let's and just so you know, I'm like looking at my notes here. I just have this one note that just so you know, I have this note, which is, what's the point? So I'm just going to mark that one off the list because we've discussed it now. But no, so let's talk about the gold coins. What's the point of the gold coins?
Okay.
Okay.
So I am going to answer your question, but first I have a story.
Okay.
So
it's a story of gold coins.
So I think this may be the first game as of the time of this recording, because these episodes are evergreen and you do not have to listen to them in an order. So if this is your first episode of Nostalgia Goggles, just jump to whatever game looks interesting next. It doesn't matter.
Yep, exactly. Because, and if you like one in particular, the best way to get in touch with us is to walk outside of your house and scream as loud as you can and then get arrested. And then we check the police blotters for who got arrested. So, and then if you go back and listen to an older episode, you now know what we were meaning when we say go out of your house and start screaming.
It's good. We need to have that like retcon where we re-explain that occasionally, so people who are jumping around, who are double jumping around, always be jumping. So
always be jumping.
So like I said, I played this game as a lad, and I remembered it being pretty easy, and my games literacy has gone up since then, so I'm better at video games. I didn't say a lot. I said it went up. Progressing an inch is still progressing. I am further down the journey of life than I was then.
I'd say from then to now, you've got one analog stick.
Touche, sir. So I remember this game being fairly easy. So I fully expected, like, I'm going to beat this game, right? Mm-hmm. And, I'm an adult. I got kids. I got a job. I was like, I will beat this game before we record the episode, but let's see. So I looked it up on how long to beat, and I was like, oh, the average completion time for this game is like 90 minutes. So challenge accepted. Right. So knowing what I was getting into, I was like, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to just plow through the game just to see if I can. Right. And then I will go back and think critically about it. But I want to see if plowing through it is even an option. Turns out it was. So I died exactly twice. And both times were because I was not paying attention and I walked off a cliff. No, sorry. One time I walked off a cliff. The second time I was like, I can make that jump, and I could not make that jump. And so tangential side story. In Minecraft, when you die, it always tells you like how you died, right? And one of my favorite things in the world is when you be sitting there playing a game and you hear over the comms, "I can make that jump," and then you see like Bry 5000 fell from a great height. Because you're like, I don't think you could. Yeah. But anyway, sorry, continue. Yeah, no, and that is exactly what happened, because the level wanted me to go around, and I was like, I can jump twice. And what I needed was 3 jumps, which, tangent to my tangent, if you beat this game fast enough, you get a 3rd jump, which is kind of neat.
Yeah, that's cool.
So
it's a cool new game plus.
Yeah. So every game should have one. So the reason I say that is because when you rage texted me, what the hell is up with the gold coins? I had this moment where I was like, well, you can beat the game without being able to answer that question. So points? Like
I guess.
I mean, you get like a very Sonic the Hedgehog at the end of every level. It like totals up like how much time you had remaining, how much HP you had remaining. So points, I think it's just points. I don't think they actually serve any function. Maybe if you collect enough of them, you get an extra Robit, but yeah, I don't honestly know what they do. I'm speculating based on my fairly sophisticated games literacy, but like I'm not sure. I am speculating.
Because that was the thing. Is at first, I was just melting enemies' faces and with my lasers, and just getting gold coins for days. And then all of a sudden, I was like, because what I was expecting and what I thought would be kind of cool, and they didn't do, which would be like once every level or 3 levels or periodically, you can buy things to upgrade your Robot, like a third jump, or like even just dumb stuff like like better armor so you take less damage. Not that you're ever going to really take enough damage to die anyways, but like just some little like leveling up mechanic is what I figured it would be for, because it would make sense, because you are a Robot, right? So you would upgrade, and upgrades would cost money. So which brings me to another point, which was the time limit. I don't know why this game has one. Because initially what I have here in my notes is they put a time limit on to stop you from grinding. So that way you don't just sit there and grind coins out of everything. But then when I realized that the coins were pointless, I was like, okay, but now why the time limit though?
No, the time limit is there because Mario and Sonic have a time limit.
Correct.
Like it's just an artifact of, well, that's how we've always done it. Like, why do you have a score? It doesn't seem to do anything because that's how we've always done it.
Exactly. It's the same thing with the score. And honestly, I think the same thing with the coins. Like, you could just destroy enemies and have them drop nothing. But like, well, you gotta collect something. They're worth coins. And so I think that's something that we've not gotten entirely away from, but a lot of the games have started to do in the current era have started to do more often, which is, not just, we have so many tools in the tool belt now, you can't cram them, you can't use them all, right? So you have to pick which ones you want, which forces you to be deliberate about what you're picking, whereas for this one, like there were a lot of mechanics like with points. Every game had a score, like, so this one does too. Well, how do you get a better score? It's like, well, you pick stuff up like coins, like a lot of games had collectibles, coins, rings, whatever it is, right? So I think you're right. I think they just put it in there because you got to collect something. And because of that, I just feel that the game's a little bit less for it, because, you end up spending time and energy collecting these coins. And here's the thing is that when you blow something up and it drops a whole bunch of coins, the coins don't kind of suction to you, right? You actually have to go collect them, which means that you're not ABJing, right? You got to scurry about the ground to pick up the coins, which means they're incentivizing you to not play the game the best way to play the game. Yeah.
No, and I'm trying to give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, and
don't.
Well, and to not just assume like everyone involved in this game was like a 3D artist and not actually a game designer, because like I said, it did start as a tech demo. I do honestly believe that this game is short and this game is easy, but what they may have been going for is a let's pretend this is chess situation where it's like, oh, the game is really simple, but we've given you a few numbers. And if you get better at the game, you can make those numbers bigger numbers, right? You can get a bigger score. You can finish a level faster so that you have more, because the timer counts down. So you have more time remaining on the clock. And they do actually, and now them saying it out loud, I'm convinced that this is what they did, because they actually then bake that into the reward system, because you do get, so this game does like a Ghost and Goblins BS. Like when you beat it the first time, they're like, haha, you didn't really defeat me. And they literally just make you play the game again. And it's super mode. And in super mode, I don't think you get the third jump in super mode, but So there's super mode and hyper mode. In one of them, they cut the amount of time you have to finish the level way down. And in the other one, they give you the extra jump. And I can't remember which is which, but like, they incentivize, they give you statistics you can see in the form of you get an extra jump, you have a timer, and you have a score. And because humans are simple creatures, you want either the biggest number or the lowest number, depending on what the objective is. So
Sure.
I don't think they just shoved those in haphazardly, but I think they shoved them in without thinking. We sort of designed a world that wants to be explored, and we accidentally disincentivized exploration.
Right. And I think that you're correct in that sense. Is if honestly, from the feel of it, and again, you know, I the view is just great from my glass house over here. You know, I mean, like I'm not saying I could do any better. I'm just, you know, just gonna crap all over everybody else's innovations. So that being said, though,
dude, we're pundits. That's what we do.
This is what we do.
We don't make games. We critique games.
We don't make games. We tell other people how to make better games. Go make them. But that being said, is that I feel the way the game feels is that they added, put in coins, a score, a time limit, because just every game had them. And then they said, like, okay, how can we leverage this in, you know, some positive fashion? And they're like, oh, well, maybe if you beat the game fast enough, then you get this other thing. Or if we want to make the game more difficult, we can like cut down the time limit, and, you know, like so on and so forth, right? And they may have backwards engineered it, like you're suggesting, a bit 6 of 1. But then, as you aptly said, is that they didn't go back and say, like, oh, well, okay, but if we have a timer on there, and we make them take damage in the first 5 seconds, and we put a bunch of coins on the ground, they're probably going to be scurrying across the ground like a small scared rabbit, not a rabbit. That's the problem, is they make you play like an actual rabbit, you know? And so
they made you the rabbit, but they incentivized the rabbit.
I know, man. And I was not ABJ, and I never felt like a rabbit, you know. I was just rabbiting all over the place. But I mean, that's the thing, is that, you know, they did these things, and then they didn't see like what type of play it incentivized. And so because of that, you know, and I think that we're lucky in the sense that we kind of have two very different viewpoints, because you have the nostalgia goggles, like from like looking back on it. So you can say like, oh yeah, well, if you play it correctly, you know, then the game's super fun. Like, look at all this sort of stuff you can do now. And I'm the control group of, this is the way they're telling me how to play the game, you know, having, especially like with our current levels of games literacy, you know, you look at it that way, because like I am also looking at it from like, oh, okay, well, if there are a bunch of coins on the ground, like I'm going to scurry around and collect all of the coins, you know? So I think my level of games literacy was almost a hindrance, because I was trying to read into what they were trying to get me to do and then do it. And that's not what they wanted me to do.
No, it was a massive hindrance. And I think this is, because we've called out every segue, this is as good a segue as any into whether or not we feel like this game held up. But I will, before we reveal those secrets,
here's a quick ad from Blue Apron.
Man, we need some sponsors, but not like,
we do need some sponsors.
Not like lame sponsors, like cool sponsors.
Yeah, right.
But until we get some, you can support us on our Patreon, which is a way you can actually give us money. But
links in the description.
Yes, they are. But no, I do want to wholeheartedly agree with your point. This is a unique instance of not only did I play this game and you didn't, but because of the particular game that I played and you didn't, we had such monumentally different experiences. Because part of me, like, I'll be honest, when you were like, dude, I can't, like, part of me was just like, this is a baby game for babies. Like, how are you?
I think you
struggling
literally
with this?
sent me a text saying this is a baby game for babies.
And then like the more we were talking about it kind of in the pre-show, and when we started recording, I was like, no, if I was him, I'd be pissed too. Like, I think this is a really interesting, you know, kind of experiment we accidentally backed ourselves into.
Yeah, right.
And so I will, you know, I'll go first. This game is 100% nostalgia goggles required. I don't know why anybody would play this, having never played it before, unless they were like, oh, I've heard that the Tough Mudder is really painful and horrible, and so they go into it like for the experience, right? Like if you said like, oh, I've heard Jumping Flash is an amazing example of horrible tank controls and why first-person platforming is a bad idea, right? Then you might go into it as a highly games literate person or as an adult or whatever. But if you just want to like relive games from your childhood, if you didn't play this one, don't play this one. Just watch somebody else play it or watch a speed run if you want to hear the crazy music and see the acid trip superstar effect. Like just watch a speed run's like 12 minutes long. Just do that and then you're good. Like this is more than maybe any game we have touched so far. Nostalgia goggles required. Like you don't go and work on a lathe without safety goggles. You do not play Jumping Flash without nostalgia goggles.
Nice. And yes, no, I agree wholeheartedly from my own personal experience as well. Who would I recommend this game to? I would honestly, I enjoyed it from the sense of like seeing something, you know, from this era where you can just see kind of like all of the, like, I don't want to crap on it too bad, but like how deep the mistakes can go, like in a rabbit hole, you know? And again, they're not like mistakes like
in a rabbit hole.
There it is. But no, it's not that I feel like I don't think that they were like mistakes born out of basically incompetence, because, you know, I think that it's just like literally they Nintendo, everybody was like forging in this brand new 3-dimensional world. And it's just kind of like, so, you know, when you go back and you look at Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time with all of its waiting, you know, like you can say like, oh, yeah, dude, that was terrible. But then you can go back and like play Jumping Flash and be like, well, I mean, you know, waiting probably wasn't that bad, huh? You know, like I can switch off on and off those iron boots a couple of extra times. Like that's probably not world ending, huh? But yeah, no, I definitely think nostalgia goggles required, because I mean, I know, and because that's the thing, is it like basically like one of the key differences is that you're supposed to ABJ, always be jumping. And I know I should have always been jumping, but honestly, my interest in this was gone in a flash.
The curtain falls, the music plays, the credits roll, then it all fades to black, and you're left by yourself. The fanfare is gone, there's no player 2 there by your side to share victories won. But as you slowly progress down the hall to your bed, a few great events leak back into your head from the time that you spent traversing the land, battling evil, fighting the darkness, just sword in hand. Your memories creeping with the edge of a smile. You realize again what you lost for a while. You're gonna think back much less on how you saved the day than on all the experience gained. At the end of it all, gamers play what we play. Not for game over, but rather for what we take away. The world is sad, but who cares? We all know that there's not much to aim for. Your next adventure's already in sight. You're all set to go. You're excited to see what's all wrong till it's right, and the world is safe. So you're more along for the ride.